All those people at home. Hello to you. All right. So what I need really, and I have some of this at home, but what I need is one of those ring lights, that'd be good. And I'd like to have to bring to school one of those 1950s microphones, that like on a boom that I can be constantly adjusting. That's what people do like video podcasts, They're always like pulling it closer. Has one of those little buffer things that goes over that little circular piece of foam or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? What's a pop filter? That's what it's called. I'm trying to tell somebody that. That's what I need. Otherwise, I'm just like everyone else. Okay. All right, let's finish up this war thing. Speaking of Pearl Harbor Day. So we're at the what to do and how a war should be ended and how it should be, how things should be treated after the war is over. And this is kind of the, yes ma'am. Oh, I thought you had the note for me. This has been the one thing that's been added on most recently. When I say most recently, I mean in the second half of the 20th century. This was not a part of the original from Augustine and Aquinas, those guys who worked on this many, many centuries ago. But, as I said, thank you. You're fine. It wasn't all that long ago that even powerful countries would come in and, destroy a country and enslave the inhabitants there and leave that country in destruction, just leave it in rubble. And never any thought was ever given to, what to do with these people that was more humane or with the place that they lived, And so you'll see how this has changed over time, at least hopefully, some of these things I'm going to say, I know that the United States has a good record of doing. I can't really speak to historically or internally about what all other countries do, because I think some of that stuff still goes on in some cases. But anyway, in recent years, though, this has been added, this justice, let's say, after the war. And this would involve, rules that or guidelines dealing with treaties, reconstruction, prisoners of war, war tribunals, if necessary, war crime tribunals, war reparations, and rebuilding. In some case, I said reconstruction, I guess. All right. Well, we have set all the guidelines for why we go into war, how we conduct ourselves in war, and then we have just this, just that, meaning just like justice. A just cause for termination of war has to be there also. That there has been a goal that's been achieved. Of course, the goal has been set in accordance with the first two sets of guidelines before and during war, and then that goal or that mission has been achieved, and whatever wrong was inflicted upon the other state that then was the aggressor, obviously the aggressor inflicted on the other state, that has been righted in some way, at least in part, whatever can be righted by war. And part of this obligation of someone following just war theory would be that they have the obligation to negotiate the terms of a surrender. So actually, and that includes giving the other side a chance to surrender and I don't know, giving them a chance to surrender with dignity, not to to kill them also and keep on going and don't leave any humans behind. There's no room for the scorched earth policy in this just war theory. But so if a legitimate authority surrenders, then there has to be a recognition that, okay, they've surrendered, and so we can end hostilities and we can go from there. Only because I know more about this, I'm not going to say things about Germany, but a lot of this is shaped from what happened in World War II. So and in particular with Germany. But there was confusion at the end of the war that there were reports, and they were pretty confirmed reports, that Hitler had died in the bunker. How it happened exactly, was all kind of up in the air, but he was dead. And that who then was in charge of Germany, like who had the authority to surrender. His death kind of meant that either he killed himself, of course that's what ultimately happened, or that he had been killed by his own inside people, which means that they're ready to, come to the table and negotiate. But who was it? Who's the person we can listen to? And of course, the Soviet Union was like most suspicious of Nazi Germany. The person who first approached them was someone that they knew, because he spoke Russian, and he had actually negotiated other things with them before the war, and even during the war, certain smaller things. But they weren't sure he was the right person to be talking to, or he had the authority, because you could have been any officer, with some personal acquaintance with these people, and you could have walked in and said, "Oh, I've been given the authority to do this." But anyway, eventually, though, they recognized this person as the person who had the authority. So this all happened. I think the war ends just in that. I don't know, 3 or 4 days after Hitler kills himself. And yeah, I know Lauren's seen, but have you seen the movie Downfall? Downfall? I know Lauren's watched it at least twice with me. So those days in the bunker, remember that? And the woman who's the secretary, she wrote a book about it, and she's kind of just nod your head. I know you watched it at least twice. Anyone seen that movie before, Downfall? It launched 1 million YouTube videos of Hitler going 999. Remember those videos that were so popular? That's from the movie Downfall. It's actually a very famous actor, a German actor. He just passed away about a year ago, and kind of took on a risky role there. It's always risky as a German actor to try to play Hitler in a movie. I think that's either you do it great and people praise you for it, or you do bad and I don't know, it doesn't go well. But, all right. So a few days later, he's dead, and it was confusion for a while. All right. So anyway, as I said, so this just cause for termination, that they've acted in the right intent. So also, there has to be the right intention in the closing of a war, no taking revenge on people, raping and pillaging, just destroying things randomly or even by order. There has to be kind of as much as possible that sounds weird, but a peaceful ending to the war, that when it ends, when the surrender has been accepted, that everyone understands that order and stops what they've been doing before. It always seemed like an odd, I've never been in a war, so I don't know, but it's always seemed like an odd thing to me that the people who are on the ground, the soldiers on the ground, let's say in a city, and they've been fighting house to house and killing, all of a sudden, because some people they don't even know above them give the order that it's over, the war is over, that they stop shooting all of a sudden, like that's it. And even in many cases then begin whatever way they can, even helping the people who they were previously would have been shooting at. It's so surreal, really, to think that's just how war is like really hotly engaged in, and then a few words come from the superiors, and then it just stops. It's just over. Not that it's always so clean like that, but all right. Again, there has to be as I kind of already mentioned this, but there has to be a public declaration of the end of the war from an authority, just the same way that it had to be an authority, authority that has the authority to declare the war. There has to be the same kind of authority that declares a truce or a surrender in the war, and then people start putting together the terms of peace, and those also be made by legitimate authority. Terms for peace, at least in World War II, there really were no, we didn't accept any terms from the Nazis or from the Japanese, for that matter. We wanted an unconditional surrender. And that's not the way all wars are fought or ended. Sometimes there are things that are negotiated at the end. that and some things might be, you know, in some favor of the losing power. But in World War II, we demanded that, and we got that from both Germany and from Japan. Okay. Then also, as I used this term before in other parts of this, that discrimination has to be used as well, not in the sense we think about normally, but the state that's victorious then it is to definitely discriminate between soldiers and or people who fought in the war or who served somehow in the machine of war, as opposed to those who are civilians, and that we don't treat those people the same. Those groups of people as the same. Punitive measures would only be taken against those who are responsible for the conflict, and civilians, of course, would be not charged that kind of thing, unless they were involved somehow. There are civilians that, even in our country, our Secretary of what do we call the guy? The Pentagon. I want to call Secretary of War. That's the old word for it, right? The Secretary of Defense. These tend to be, at least when they serve, they tend to be civilians. Maybe they were in the military before, but they're civilians. And we do have civilians, of course, in the presidency and other offices. Those people would be, if we did something terrible, those people would be, part of who could be convicted or could be looked at or punished in some way. Okay, same thing with other countries. There are civilians, and then there are also combatants and government leaders. Then they've got to be looked at differently, discriminated, who's who. Then, this is an important one that I'll say this in a minute, but this is when I was younger. I used to see these flags all over the place. And this would have been in the early 70s, so the Vietnam War was still going on, and then when it ended, there were these flags that were about, they're black, and they have the white print on them and a couple of symbols, and they say, "Welcome home, POW," and then something else about, I forget what it said, MIA, missing in action people. And I don't know if we ever really got a full kind of accounting for all the soldiers that were, this had to do with Vietnam, all the soldiers that were unaccounted for. I don't think, we have to assume that, they returned all the prisoners that were in, but there was always suspicion. Of course, now it's not talked about so much anymore, but that the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, were holding still prisoners, American prisoners in camps, prisoner of war camps, even long after the war was over. I don't know if we had any proof for believing that. But other than the fact we didn't have all of our soldiers back. And that's just not the way things, always work, I suppose, in war. Although I don't know, because I've never been in a war. But that people do get lost. People get in heated combat, and in such a real close kind of situations that people go running off different directions, trying to defend themselves, and they get detached from their group, and then they get lost, and then they get killed or captured, and nobody knows what happened to them. I don't mean to be too, but their body might decay somewhere in the, who knows where, and they're never found again. So were they captured? Maybe, or maybe they were shot. But so there's missing in action and POWs. But so that there's, according to Just War, there should be a return of prisoners of war. There are always prisoners, and and so those people should be returned to their country, especially those who are foot soldiers, and there might be higher-ranking officers who maybe had more or more complicit in the graver things that went on. Maybe they should be held for a trial, but that depends on their situation. I know you guys don't remember this, but in the first Gulf War, so in the early 90s, we had bombed Iraq for a month. There were no ground forces for 1 month. The military, mainly the B-52s and other stealth bombers, they just bombed. Where we knew that there were people, not people, but soldiers were, and a lot of them were underground and all that, but we just bombed and bombed for 30 days. That was the strategy, actually. And they called it softening the ground, William. Soften up the ground. Yeah. Well, it also kills a lot of people, but it does break a lot of people's resolve to fight. Because we knew that a lot of the Iraqi soldiers were conscripted at the last minute, some of them even like kidnapped, and forced into military service. So they weren't exactly, gung ho about necessarily about Saddam Hussein or about going to war or whatever. But I don't say this to be funny, but I'm talking about. I say it in the larger picture that we, as in general, the United States has done a really, as I said the other day, done a good job in how they treated prisoners of war. But we also done a good job in returning those prisoners of war after the war is over, returning them back to their country. During the Gulf War, though, once ground troops moved in, they had people were surrendering to them. This sounds funny, but it's not funny. You think about what point you get to. But there were people who were putting their underwear on a stick and waving it like a white flag, right? And of course we would see that and we would acknowledge that's a surrender signal, but we were taking so many prisoners that we couldn't hardly handle all the prisoners, and they were having to put together these kind of makeshift camps, just with razor wire and whatever, just to kind of. So the strategy worked. That's why the ground war was only 100 hours or so, or 4 days or so of war. But yeah, we pretty much we softened the ground up, I guess, is the right thing about the war. Made them think differently about things. It's got to be, and we're lucky we've never experienced this here, but it has to be just a harrowing experience to. Like, it's not like World War II where you would have heard these B-19 bombers were anything but stealth. You would have heard them coming. I don't know if you've been around one of those big bombers, and if you've ever seen one in real life today, that they have a lot of them. And it's unbelievably loud. But if you had like 100 of them fly over, it'd be deafening. You couldn't even. I don't think you could even talk to people around you. And even as high as they flew, it would have been just deafening. And well, that's all maybe strategy in some way. But today, people that these planes, these stealth bombers, they fly at 40,000 feet, whatever, and they've got GPS guided missiles that go right where they want them to go. But can you just imagine just like walking around and not having any warning, and plus the radar's not picking them up, so there's no warning going off, and then the building next to you explodes, just out of nowhere, just no sound at all, bam. That's an intimate. So things like that will get your attention if you're a soldier. After a while, 30 days of that, you become a believer, And anyway, we took a lot of prisoners. I'll tell you one other quick story here. This is not about the Gulf War. It's about the Civil War. The same thing happened there as the North was starting to win the war, and we were moving and taking over more and more of the South. The Union was. They were taking prisoners who were surrendering just so much that they didn't have time to build like some place to hold them. So they would only leave behind a couple of soldiers to guard a whole bunch of Confederate people who'd surrendered, and they would dig or make it very clear in the dirt a circle, and all the prisoners had to stay inside that circle. What's wrong?
Please continue.
What was it? Was it funny? Because I'd like to tell the joke.
I was telling Patrick it sounds like a seagull circle.
Okay. Okay. Well, actually, that has like a real root in something we say all the time. And this circle was called, although it's not a line, right? It was called the deadline. You heard of that before? And the rule was to the Union troops. This is it. A couple of rules. Number one, anyone steps over that line, you shoot them. So you could have two guards pretty much guarding this large group in a big circle. Rule two was every once in a while, just shoot somebody. Just to let them know that we're not afraid to do this. Now that doesn't follow just war theory, but that was so just in case everybody thinks they want to jump over the line, thinks we're messing around, just every once in a while. Okay, well, that's terrible. But now we use the word deadline differently, right? Think about that, but okay. and these words keep popping up again, but the one other part of this is proportionality. That had to do with the way that we conducted ourselves in the war, but under the terms of surrender, there, there must be some proportionality. There must be some discretion used there. Um, um, Something proportional to the rights that were initially violated by the other country. Kind of, absolute measures, kind of a absolutionist crusade or something that some general or a president has, that wouldn't be looked upon favorably. That's different than unconditional surrender. But yeah, to still treat the people with dignity of some sort that you're negotiating with in the terms of surrender. You don't want to say, no, like I said, we're not going to, we're going to enslave you, and we're going to, what we didn't destroy already, we're going to destroy when we get done here. And, people will never speak of this country ever again because it'll be gone. That would be inappropriate then. And that would include, of course, that proportionality would include any attempt at denying the other country's right to surrender. And recognizing that surrender, that would be disproportionate in the way that we've dealt with them. Okay, I mentioned already that the United States has had a good record of returning soldiers, but one other POWs, and those who are POWs who've been injured that we would have cared for as well. But one other thing that we have done differently, I'll say, than a lot of countries, is that after the war's over and the terms of surrender and all that's all been negotiated in the war, is we have been, and I'm, pat ourselves on the back for this is actually very kind of us, something we don't have to do, but we've been very generous in the way that we've helped those countries with, billions and billions of dollars, maybe trillions over the last 70 years or so, of helping them rebuild their country, of getting a government set back up again, of economically kind of stimulating things again, because so many things have been destroyed during the war. Modes of production and all that have been destroyed. So giving them a chance to kind of get started, and with the goal of ultimately them in a peaceful way kind of rejoining the community of nations and participating in a positive way. And if you look at two countries like Germany and Japan, you see two countries that have really benefited from that generosity, right? We could have been a lot more harsh on them, but we were not. I don't forget what it's called in Japan, but the Marshall Plan is the one in Europe that we, poured lots of money into, and that's not something that we're obligated to do. That's not necessarily, that doesn't, but what happens then? Well, what happens is that there's a vacuum in that country of power, and then whoever they, put in power after the war's over could be just as bad or worse than the person you were fighting before. So it actually, in the end, maybe works to our benefit. So now we have these two allies, let's say, and these former enemies of Germany and Japan, and both very economically successful former enemies. All right, and again, that's been the case, like I said, in Europe, in Japan, and Germany, and most recently in the Middle East. That we've spent. I don't know that we've had the same kind of success economically there, but at least we have stayed and tried to keep the peace as much as possible, and to get things started. But William and Lauren, I was hard to do this. Sorry, guys, I don't mean to pick on you guys so much. But like after World War II ended in Germany, like these women who lost their husbands and sons, and they came out. Remember, they started cleaning up. They started like sweeping the sidewalks and stuff. They started picking up all the rubble. They would put in one pile the stones that could maybe be used to rebuild that building again over here in one pile. But the ones that had been destroyed, they put them in buckets, and they handed those buckets from one person to the next. And they handed it down these hills, and they put it out to the street where it'd be picked up by by some kind of a, what do you call those things that scoop up stuff? Those excavator, yeah, pick that up and carry it off. Yeah, so it's a little bit different mentality. They were like, well, this is a mess. We got to clean this up. We got to get started again, And it started at that level, that women just kind of organized themselves. And it was primarily women, and some children, but, and who knows, maybe they didn't even know if their husband or son were coming back or not. or if they were dead or not. They didn't know. So it also was maybe kind of a therapy for them to do that. But the last thing I'm going to show you, this is like a quick video about this, that something that happened in World War II were these war tribunals that took place, and that's now seen as a part of a way. If there were war criminals, that war criminals should be, not just set loose on society again, but they should be tried, and they have a fair trial, and they're even afforded an attorney, a defense attorney, attorneys plural, and on the world stage, that makes it look as it is that if they're not guilty, then they deserve like we believe, a vigorous defense. Even people who are guilty deserve a vigorous defense. And so we gave, in particular, the Germans a chance to defend themselves. And everyone knows about the Nuremberg trials. I've already mentioned this, but there were other smaller scale trials held all over Germany and other places in Europe for people who colluded with the Nazis, and many people from those smaller trials, as well as the Nuremberg trials, were hanged, and many prison sentences were given, life sentences, and I think there were some shorter sentences, a few years, and some of the higher ranking, I guess the highest ranking person within Hitler's kind of inner circle got 20 years in prison, but he was, we'll see him just in a minute, Albert Speer. He was the one who, I don't know, they call him the good Nazi, if that's oxymoron, maybe. He admitted he knew that what they were doing was wrong. The other Nazis are pretty belligerent about the whole thing. They weren't guilty of anything, and if anything, they were guilty of just following orders, and of course we talked about that last time, that's not really, that's not a viable defense for somebody. So fair tribunals, yeah, try to give justice to those who suffered any war crime, and we did that together. It wasn't just us. We did it together with the French, the British, and the Soviet Union. We held these trials, and now I think it's a benchmark for the rest of the world in the way that countries should be treated after a war. Okay, let me see here. Share screen. So this is a video of some statements that were given by Nazis. This is I believe it's after they've been convicted. I don't remember all of a sudden. But maybe they're kind of their closing statements. And it's just about, oops, what happened? That's not it. Well, where did that go? No, that's not right. There we go. I'll put this up on the screen here. Or can you see it already? You can see it.
Anklage dienen konnten, aber im gleichen Augenblick als Meinheit bezeichnet, wo diese Aussagen die Anklage widerlegen.
The prosecution uses the fact that I was the second man of the state as proof that I must.
Hermann Wilhelm Göring.
And so Göring, if you know, this would be a name that maybe is familiar with in history, but Göring was the, among other things, he was the head of the Air Force, but he was also in definitely in the tight inner circle that Hitler had, maybe 4 or 5 people. He was one of the recognized of those in the inner circle. And here's part of his statement he was going to make.
Die Anklagebehörde hat in ihren Schlussplädoyers die Verteidigung und ihre Beweisführung als völlig wertlos behandelt. Die unter Eid gemachten Ausführungen der Angeklagten wurden von ihr dort als absolut wahr angenommen, wo diese zur Stützung der Anklage dienen konnten. aber im gleichen Augenblick als Meineiid bezeichnet, wo diese Aussagen die Anklage widerlegten.
The prosecution uses the fact that I was the second man of the state as proof that I must have known everything that happened. But it does not present any documentary or other convincing proof in cases why I have denied under oath that I knew about certain things, much less desired them. Therefore, it's only an allegation and a conjecture when the prosecution says, who should have known that, if not Göring, who was the successor of the Führer? No state ever gave notice to the Reich at the proper time, pointing out that any activity for National Socialism would be made subject to punishment and persecution. On the other hand, if we, the leaders, as individuals, are called to account and condemned, very well. But you cannot punish the German people at the same time. The German people placed their trust in the Führer, and under his authoritarian government, they had no influence on events. Without knowledge of the grave crimes which have become known today, the people, loyal, self-sacrificing, and courageous, fought and suffered through the life and death struggle which had broken out against their will. The German people are free of guilt. I did not want war, nor did I bring it about. I did everything to prevent it by negotiations. After it had broken out, I did everything to assure victory. Since the three greatest powers on earth, together with many other nations, were fighting against us, we finally succumbed to their tremendous superiority. I stand up for the things that I have done, but I deny most emphatically that my actions were dictated by the desire to subjugate foreign peoples by wars, to murder them, to rob them, or to enslave them, or to commit atrocities or crimes. The only motive which guided me was my ardent love for my people, its happiness, its freedom, and its life. And for this, I call on the Almighty.
Was wir beabsichtigten, war unsere elementarsten Daseinsbedingungen.
What we intended was to look after our elementary necessities of life. And in the same way that England looked after her own interests in order to make 1/5 of the world subject to her, and in the same way that the United States brought an entire continent and Russia brought the largest inland territory of the world under their hegemony. The only difference between the policies of these countries as compared with ours is that we demanded parcels of land such as Danzig and the corridor, which were taken from us against all rights, whereas the other powers are accustomed to thinking only in terms of continents.
Wilhelm Keitel.
Now,
So Keitel was the chief military strategist, you know, he was the commander of the military forces. There's probably a better title than that, but
at the end of this trial, I want to present equally frankly the avowal and confession I have to make today.
Yeah.
In the
German
course
High
of
Command.
the trial, my defense counsel submitted two fundamental questions to me. The first one, already some month ago. It was, in case of a victory, would you have refused to participate in any part of the success? I answered, no. I should certainly have been proud of it. The second question was, how would you act if you were in the same position again? My answer, then I would rather choose death than to let myself be drawn into the net of such pernicious methods. From these two answers, the High Tribunal may see my viewpoint.
Ich habe geirrt. Ich war nicht imstande zu verhindern, was hätte verhindert werden müssen. Das ist meine Schuld. Es ist tragisch, einsehen zu müssen, dass das Beste, was ich als Soldat gegeben hatte, Gehorsam und Treue für nicht erkennbare Absichten ausgenutzt wurde. Und dass ich nicht sah, dass aus der soldatischen Nichterfüllung eine Grenze gesetzt ist. Das ist mein Schicksal. Möge aus der klaren Erkenntnis der Ursachen der unheilvollen Methoden und der schrecklichen schrecklichen Folgen dieses Kriegsgeschehens für das deutsche Volk Hoffnung erwachsen auf eine neue Zukunft in der Gemeinschaft der Völker. Macht mich verantwortlich für die Konzentrationslager.
The prosecution holds me responsible for the concentration camps, for the destruction of Jewish life, for Einsatzgruppen and other things. All of this is neither in accord with the evidence nor with the truth. The accusers as well as the accused are exposed to the dangers of a summary proceeding. In the Jewish question, I was just as much deceived as other high officials. I never approved or tolerated the biological extermination of Jewry. The anti-Semitism found in party and state laws was still to be considered in time of war as an emergency defense measure. The anti-Semitism of Hitler, as we understand it today, was barbarism. I did not participate in either of these forms and maintain, as I shall show, that the discontinuance of the extermination of the Jews is to be traced to my influence on Hitler. I know only that in my belief in Adolf Hitler, I put all my strength at the disposal of my people. As a German soldier, I could only put myself at the service of the defense against those destructive forces which had once brought Germany close to the abyss, and which today, after the collapse of the Reich, are still threatening the world. If I have made mistakes in my work through a false conception of obedience, if I carried out orders, all of which, insofar as they are alleged to be cardinal orders, were issued before my time of office, then they are part of a fate which is stronger than myself and which is carrying me along with it.
Herr Präsident, meine Herren Richter.
Mr. President, may it please the tribunal.
I think this is, yeah, Albert Speer, and he's the one who spent 20 years in prison after the war, but they didn't hang him. All the other guys all got hanged, by the way, ones that are talking.
Hitler and the collapse of his system have brought a time of tremendous suffering upon the German people. The useless continuation of this war and the unnecessary destruction makes the work of reconstruction more difficult. Privation and misery have come to the German people. After this trial, the German people will despise and condemn Hitler as the proven author of its misfortune. But the world will learn from these happenings not only to hate dictatorship as a form of government, but to fear it. As a former minister of a highly developed armament system, it is my last duty to say the following. A new large-scale war will end with the destruction of human culture and civilization. Therefore, this trial must contribute towards preventing such degenerate wars in the future and towards establishing rules whereby human beings can live together. It is not the battles of war alone that shape the history of humanity, but also, in a higher sense, the cultural achievements which one day will become the common property of all humanity. A nation which believes in its future will never perish. May God protect Germany and the culture of the West.
All right. That's how they did it.
That's all I had to say.
Well, he had a much, that was just his closing statement or whatever. But he actually, here, that's him right here. That's Albert Speer. I can recognize him. And he wrote a couple of books while he was, and he also helped the Allies find out about a lot of things they didn't know about. So he was kind of helpful after the war, and they rewarded him. This guy was one of the prosecutors, and I think he died just recently, one of the American prosecutors in the Nuremberg trials. He didn't, I know he died, but it wasn't all that long ago. But anyway, there you go. All right, I'm not even there. Okay, got one person watching. A lot of people quarantined. One person watching. Okay, so we'll pick up tomorrow, and we will, I'll be putting together a study guide for you, so for the test on Friday. And don't forget to do the reading. What is it? 111 to 162. 111 to 162 in this book right here. You see in the corner right there. All right.